Before we begin, I want to warn you, this story contains mature themes. It deals with emotional neglect, betrayal, and the consequences of choices made in loneliness. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop listening now. But if you stay, I promise you this is not just a story about mistakes. It's a story about pain, about longing, and about what happens when love turns into something it was never meant to be. I used to believe in love. The kind that lasts. The kind that survives hardships, sickness, even time. For years, I thought my marriage was built on that kind of love. But I was wrong. I met Willie Robbins when I was 23. I was fresh out of college, full of life, convinced that the right man could make the world feel safer, smaller, like home. And for a while, he did. Willie wasn't the kind of man who spoke in poetry or showered me with grand gestures, but he was steady. Reliable. The type of man who worked hard, came home every night, and made me feel like I had a place beside him. We built a life together, modest but good. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We weren't perfect, but we had each other. At least, I thought we did. Then, life happened. The kind of life that strips away illusions and makes you see what's real. I spent years taking care of my home, my husband, and most of all, our son, Stevie. When he was born, I thought I had finally found my purpose. He was my heart outside my body. Willie was a good father back then. He did his part, but if I'm honest, the emotional weight of raising Stevie fell on me. I was the one who soothed him when he cried at night, who stayed up late helping with homework, who made sure he always felt safe. But I never resented it. I loved being his mother more than anything else in the world. For a long time, I convinced myself that love meant sacrifice. That putting everyone else first was what made a good wife, a good mother. But what happens when the people you sacrifice for stop seeing you? 2 years ago, I had an accident that changed everything. It was a normal afternoon. I was cleaning the house, like I always did. There was a stain on the living room wall that had been bothering me for weeks. I remember climbing the ladder, stretching just a little too far, and then, nothing. Just a sharp crack of pain and the world going black. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctors told me I was paralyzed from the waist down. My right arm was weakened, sometimes completely numb. I would need help, constant help, to move, to bathe, to dress, to simply exist in my own home. And that's when I realized something terrible. I had spent my whole life taking care of my family. But when I needed someone to take care of me, there was no one. Willie tried, at first. He hired a caregiver, paid the bills, made sure I had what I needed physically. But emotionally? He was absent. At first, I told myself it was because he was overwhelmed. That maybe seeing me like this, helpless, broken, was too much for him to handle. I wanted to believe that he was struggling too, that he just didn't know how to show it. But then I saw the truth. He wasn't overwhelmed. He just didn't care enough to try. Some nights, I'd ask him for help getting into bed, and he'd sigh, acting like I was asking for the world. Other times, he'd tell me, "You can figure it out." He stopped sitting next to me on the couch. Stopped looking at me like I was his wife. Stopped looking at me at all. When the caregiver left, I begged him to help me more. To just be there. But he buried himself in work. Found every excuse to stay out of the house longer. And when he was home, he barely spoke to me. I was trapped in that house, trapped in my own body, and the person who was supposed to love me couldn't even pretend to care. And then, Stevie came home. The pandemic had turned the world upside down. He had been living on his own in another state, but when everything shut down, he decided to move back in. I told him not to come at first. I didn't want him to see me like that. Weak. But he insisted. He said he wanted to help. And unlike his father, he meant it. From the first day he walked through the door, things changed. Stevie was patient. He didn't sigh when I needed something. He didn't look at me with pity or frustration. he just helped. Without being asked. Without hesitation. If I needed to move, he carried me. If I struggled to eat, he cut my food. When I felt embarrassed about needing help with bathing, he reassured me, made it feel like it was just something that needed to be done, nothing more, nothing less. But more than that, he talked to me. Every night, after helping me into bed, he'd sit beside me and talk. Sometimes about his day, sometimes about things we had never spoken about before. Things I had never even known he felt. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone. Someone saw me again. Someone cared. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. Didn't see the way the lines were beginning to blur. But looking back, maybe I didn't want to see it. Maybe I just wanted to hold on to the only real connection I had left. And that was my first mistake. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own breathing. The house would be silent. Willie would be in the other room, asleep, or maybe still at his desk, buried in work, pretending that if he ignored me long enough, I'd stop existing. And some nights, I almost wished I would. I didn't feel like a wife anymore. I barely felt human. I felt like a problem that no one wanted to deal with. A task that had been pushed to the bottom of a never-ending list. Before my accident, I was independent. I could go anywhere, do anything. I had a routine, a life of my own. Now, every movement was a struggle. Every little thing I needed. Water, food, help getting into my wheelchair, was another reminder that I couldn't do this alone. And the worst part? The man I had spent my whole life with made me feel like I should be able to. You'll figure it out. You just have to try harder. I'm busy right now. At first, I told myself it wasn't his fault. Maybe he just didn't know how to handle it. Maybe watching me like this was too much for him. But then I realized something, he never even tried. He didn't want to handle it. He wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. So, I stopped asking. I stopped calling out when I needed something. Stopped telling him when I was in pain. Stopped expecting him to care. I told myself I didn't need him. But then Stevie came home. And suddenly, I had someone who wanted to help. Someone who looked at me like I was still a person, not a burden. At first, it was little things. He'd bring me water, before I even had to ask. Adjust my pillow, so my back wouldn't ache. Stay up with me late at night, talking, even when I knew he was exhausted. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. The first time Stevie helped me bathe, I felt humiliated. I had spent my whole life being independent. Taking care of him, not the other way around. Now, I had to sit there, helpless, while my own son rolled up his sleeves and helped me do something I should have been able to do on my own. "It's okay, Mom," he said. "You don't have to be embarrassed." But I was. Not just because of the physical act, but because deep down, I liked being taken care of again. I liked that someone was there, willing to do what my own husband wouldn't. And that scared me. The more he helped me, the more I depended on him. The more I looked forward to his company. I started noticing the small things, how gentle he was, how patient, how he never made me feel like I was asking for too much. And the late-night talks? Those were the worst. We started with small things. He told me about his job, his friends, how the world had changed during the pandemic. But then, the conversations got deeper. I told him things I had never told anyone. About how scared I was when I first realized I couldn't move my legs. How I would lie awake at night, wondering if my husband even loved me anymore. How sometimes, I felt like my life had ended the moment I hit the ground. I should have seen the danger in those moments. Should have realized that dependency can disguise itself as love. But I didn't. And that was my second mistake. I don't know if I can pinpoint the exact moment when everything changed. Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was a series of little moments, piling up, one on top of the other, until they became too heavy to ignore. But I do know there was a turning point. It was late, past midnight. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Stevie had helped me into bed, just like he always did, but that night felt different. Maybe it was because Willie hadn't come home again. Maybe it was because I had spent the entire day sitting in the same chair, staring at the same walls, feeling like I didn't exist. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, I felt wanted. Stevie sat beside me, like he always did. At first, we just talked. But the conversation drifted into places we had never gone before. "Do you ever think about what life used to be like?" I asked him. "All the time," he said. "Do you ever miss it?" "I miss a lot of things," he admitted. "Mostly, I just miss feeling close to someone." Something in my chest tightened. I wanted to tell him I understood. That I missed it too. That there was an ache inside me that had nothing to do with my body and everything to do with being forgotten. But I didn't say those things. Instead, I just reached for his hand. A small, simple gesture. One that shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. It meant everything. I don't know how long we sat there like that. His hand in mine, the silence stretching between us. But in that silence, something shifted. Something I wasn't ready to face. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. And that was dangerous. When it happened, it wasn't planned. It wasn't something I thought about or even allowed myself to want. It was just a moment. A moment that should have never happened. A moment I can never take back. And the second it was over, reality crashed down on me like a wave, pulling me under, drowning me in guilt, in confusion, in shame. I felt like I had been split in two. One part of me was still the woman I had always been, the mother, the wife, the person who knew right from wrong. But the other part? The other part had been so starved for love, for touch, for connection, that she didn't care about consequences. And I hated her. I wanted to take it back. To rewind time, to erase everything that had just happened. But I couldn't. There are some lines that, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And I had crossed one of them. I tried to make sense of it. For a brief second, I convinced myself that this was love. That it made sense because he was the only one who had been there for me. The only one who had looked at me like I was still worth something. But that was a lie. It wasn't love. It was loneliness, disguised as love. And the truth? The truth was uglier than I wanted to admit. It was a betrayal. A deep, irreversible betrayal. Not just of my marriage. Not just of my family. But of myself. I thought guilt would come all at once, like a sudden rush of cold air, shocking me awake, forcing me to face what I had done. But it didn't. It crept in slowly, sinking into my skin, my thoughts, my every breath. It followed me through the house, whispering in the silence, filling every moment with a heaviness I couldn't escape. At first, I told myself that if I didn't think about it, it would go away. That if I acted normal, if I pretended nothing had changed, then maybe, just maybe, it would be true. But I knew better. Because the truth was everything had changed. I started to recover. My body, at least. The therapy was working. My right arm, once weak and useless, was gaining strength. My legs, numb and lifeless for so long, began responding in ways I never thought they would. First, a small twitch in my toes. Then, the ability to move my foot, then my ankle. Every week, I improved. Every week, I got closer to walking again. Willie thought it was the treatment. The doctors thought it was determination. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just therapy. It was Stevie. It was the way he held me up, the way he guided me through every painful step, the way his presence made me want to be stronger. And that's what made it worse. Because every bit of progress felt like a punishment, not a victory. My body was healing, but my soul? My soul was decaying. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without seeing what I had done. I couldn't lie in bed without feeling the weight of my mistake pressing down on me. Every touch, every moment we shared, played over and over in my mind, not with warmth, but with shame. It was as if I had been given a second chance at life, and I had ruined it before it even began. I should have stopped it. I should have been stronger. I should have. But it was too late for should have. We never spoke about what it meant. Not really. Because the truth was, we both knew it was wrong. But that didn't stop us from acting like nothing had happened. During the day, everything was the same. He helped me, guided me, made sure I ate, made sure I rested. He still talked to me late into the night, still made me feel like I wasn't alone. But there was something different in the way he looked at me. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It wasn't regret, either. It was something in between, a quiet, unsettled confusion. One night, he finally said it. "Mom, do you regret it?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him that no, I didn't regret it, that what happened meant something, that it wasn't just a mistake. But I couldn't. Because that wasn't the truth. So instead, I said nothing. And in that silence, I think he got his answer. Willie still traveled for work. Still made excuses. Still barely noticed I was getting better. He would come home late, exhausted, barely sparing me a glance before heading to bed. Some nights, he didn't even bother with that, he'd just sleep in his office, as if being near me was too much effort. I told myself I didn't care anymore. That his neglect didn't hurt me, that I had long since stopped needing him. But I was lying to myself. Because I did care. Not in the way I once had, not with love, not with longing. But with anger. With resentment. Because the truth, the ugly, undeniable truth, was that this wasn't all his fault. For so long, I had blamed him for everything. For my loneliness, for my pain, for the slow unraveling of our marriage. I had hated him for abandoning me when I needed him most. But in the end, the worst betrayal wasn't his. It was mine. I thought guilt was something you could move past. That time would soften it, make it easier to carry. But I was wrong. Guilt doesn't fade. It festers. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, in the spaces between words that should have never been spoken. I wake up every morning, and for a brief second, I forget. I forget what I've done, who I've become. But then reality settles in, heavy and suffocating, and I remember. I look at him now, and I don't just see my son. I see a reflection of my weakness. My failure. My inability to control the loneliness inside me. Some days, I can barely look him in the eye. And yet, I can't let him go. Because in some twisted, cruel way, he is still the only person who truly sees me. I used to believe love was supposed to lift you up, to make you feel whole. But this? This doesn't feel like love. It feels like a prison. A prison of my own making. The walls aren't made of stone. They're made of silence. Of shame. Of choices I can never take back. I used to crave his presence. Now, when he's near, all I feel is fear. Fear that he sees me the way I see myself. Fear that I've ruined him. Fear that one day, he'll wake up and realize what I've always known, this was never supposed to happen. We don't talk about it. Not really. We pretend that what we have is normal, that our bond is something unbreakable. But deep down, I know, we are both lying. Because love isn't supposed to feel like a secret you can't escape. And that's exactly what this has become. The nights are the worst. That's when the thoughts creep in, the ones I try so hard to push away during the day. Did I take away his future? Did I make him love someone he was never supposed to love? What if he never recovers from this? What if I have ruined him forever? I avoid mirrors now. I can't stand to see myself. The woman staring back at me isn't someone I recognize. She isn't the wife I once was. She isn't the mother I used to be. She is something else entirely. Something broken. Something unforgivable. Some nights, I want to tell him to leave. To start over. To find someone who can love him the way he deserves to be loved. But I don't. Because the truth is, I don't know who I am without him anymore. And that terrifies me. This isn't a love story. It's not even a tragedy. It's a warning. Because the worst kind of betrayal isn't the one that destroys your marriage. It's the one that destroys your soul. I used to think the worst thing in the world was being unloved. But I was wrong. The worst thing is being loved in a way that shouldn't exist. And knowing that, no matter what I do, I will never be able to undo it. I wish I could go back. Not just to the moment everything changed, but long before that. Back to when my marriage started to crumble. Back to when I first felt invisible. Back to when I convinced myself that love and attention, no matter where it came from, was enough to fill the emptiness inside me. But life doesn't work that way. There are no second chances. No do-overs. There is only the weight of what you've done, and the question of whether you can live with it. I used to believe that infidelity was black and white, cheating is wrong, love is right. But what happens when love itself becomes the betrayal? What happens when the thing that makes you feel alive is also the thing that destroys you? Because that's what this is, destruction. I destroyed my marriage. I destroyed the trust that once existed in my family. And worst of all? I destroyed the version of myself I once believed in. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: loneliness is dangerous. Neglect is dangerous. And the worst mistakes happen when you seek love in the wrong places. Because love, real love, should never come at the cost of your soul. Maybe you've never made a mistake like mine. Maybe you think you never could. But let me ask you this. Have you ever felt so alone that you did something you never thought you were capable of? Have you ever crossed a line because, for just one moment, you needed to feel something real? And if you have, how do you live with it? Because I still don't know the answer. If you feel comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who is struggling. And if this story made you think, if it made you question, reflect, or feel something real, then let's keep these conversations going. Subscribe, like, and share this video so more people can hear this message.